The most important part when working with GameDraw is the creation or editing of meshes. So let's first go and see how we can edit a mesh and create new models from that mesh. This can be done through the Edit tab. So once we click on this tab, we can see that we can work with vertices, we can work with edges, we can work with triangles, and we can work with elements. Let's select a different model so that we can see the highlights. So if we select this one and went to the Edit tab, we can now work on our model. You can see that the vertices are highlighted, the edges also can be highlighted, and the elements as well. When working with selection, you can use Shift to add to the selection or remove from the selection. You can use Ctrl to remove from the selection, and you can use Ctrl Shift to always add to the selection without removing. This also works with edges, triangles, and elements. Each of the vertices, the edges, the triangles, and elements has its unique functions that I will introduce in the next chapter. One of the most important aspects when working with geometry is editing of vertices. So when we want to edit vertices, we can simply select vertices from the Edit tab, and we can select vertices that we want to move, rotate, or scale. For example, I can move these down, I can scale them, and I can do other functions like growing my selection or shrinking my selection. On the other hand, let's take a case where I want to weld the vertices that I have scaled down. So I can click on Weld Vertices and they will get welded. Typically, if you want to weld within a specific threshold, you can do that by specifying this threshold, and you can also delete any selected vertices and it will delete all related triangles. So let's suppose I want to work with edges of my model. So I go to the edge mode and I start selecting edges. For example, I can do the same that I have done with the vertices, so I can do translation, rotation, and scale. On the other hand, I can do functions like split edge, which will split my edge so that I can do modifications like this one. I can also delete edges. And in case I want to undo, I can just click Ctrl and Z. The most important mode when creating geometry is the triangle mode, which allows you from modifying your geometry. So let's go to the triangle mode and see what we can do in there. For example, let me create a small table that I can use in this scene. So I go to Edit, Triangles, and I can move my triangles. I can also extrude my selection by clicking this button. me do another extrude, and another one. Now we have a small table. Let's first position it in our scene. And let's see. So if I want to add more details to the table, I can always use subdivision. So for example, I can select faces that I want to subdivide and I click on selection only. Then I can use two types of subdivision. One of them is by edge, which will split my selection, and the other one is by center. So let's take, for example, this one and create a small extension for my table. And let's add two legs to it. Okay. Let's make it unique in its way. So this is our new table. So let's suppose that you want to insert your 3D model and create some sort of a hole. So basically you choose the triangles you want to insert and you click on extrude, then you scale down and click extrude again, and then you move down to create that hole. So let's suppose you want to create a room like this one. So what you can do is that you can create a cube. Now you can scale that cube a little bit. You start by moving the triangles, extruding them to create the rooms you want. And finally, you can select all the triangles and you can then click on flip faces. So now the faces are from the inside. To see this, let's create some lights. So you can do your level very fast. There is a number of other functions that you can use when editing your mesh. So for example, you can slice your mesh by selecting slice option. It's available on all of your editing modes. So if I select slice, I get the slice plane, so I can rotate it and move it as I want. So for example, let's slice here. When I want to slice, I just click on the slice button, and when I finish slicing, I just untoggle slice. Then I can just deal with my game object as I want. Some other important functions that we can see in GameDraw is the ability to mirror. So for example, if I just created this shape, for example, I can just click on mirror on the direction I want, or a combination of directions. For example, let's take the X direction. Now I have a new object mirrored from my original object. We can also detach objects from our existing object. For example, if I select these faces, I can detach them so they are now separate game objects. Or I can even clone part of my mesh. For example, I can select these and I can click on clone, and I will get a cloned part of my mesh. We can also use soft selection. So let's delete those. So when in soft selection, I can select a vertex, for example, then I can click on use soft selection, and I then grow my selection, and when moved, it will take the weight in consideration. On the other hand, we can use the use freeform handle so that we can deal with our selection as if it is relative to the camera. Another important function that you might find useful is the ability to project your vertices into a certain direction. For example, if we created a sphere or any object that has a collider, then I can select a group of vertices and I can project it into a certain direction. So for example, I can project to the up Y, and as you can see, the vertices that collided with the sphere are projected on the surface of the sphere. So if we just take this sphere into the middle and we grow it like this, and then we selected a group of vertices like those and we clicked on the up, you can see how they got projected on the surface of the sphere. So you can get some pretty good looking stuff with this one. Another good function that might be useful is the smooth function. So for example, if I subdivided by edge, then I clicked on smooth, I can get my shape smooth. Elements in GameDraw are submeshes in your mesh or a group of triangles representing a material. So whenever you go over a material, you can see all the triangles highlighted for that material. So let's suppose that we want to save our mesh or export it. We go and select our mesh, we click on the GameDraw icon. From the general tab, we click if in case we want to save it as a native asset to Unity, which is the default format. We click this one and we name it, let's say player.asset, and we click on save. Now the mesh is mapped to your hard disk, and in case you change it, it will preserve the changes and it will no longer be just allocated in the memory. And in case you never saved your mesh, you might lose it when you close Unity, because the memory will be taken and eaten by the garbage collector. In some cases, you might want to modify your mesh outside of Unity using any other third-party program. So you want to export it to a format that can be read by any other 3D program. So to do that, we have two formats, the OBJ format and the CTM format. Let's select, for example, the OBJ format. We click on export OBJ and we select the location we want to export to, and then we click save. Now we have our object exported, and we can now use it with any other 3D program. It is simple to create a prefab of your mesh. Just drag your game object from the scene hierarchy to the project hierarchy, and once you drag it, it will create a prefab holding a reference to a saved mesh. That saved mesh represents your model. So if we take a look at the prefab, you can see it, which is your created model, as well as you can see the reference, which is auto-saved for you. Creating copies of your mesh is an important aspect when using GameDraw. So as I said before, don't ever use the original mesh, always create copies of it. So if we want to modify something, we modify a copy, not the original mesh. For example, we can create multiple copies, rename each copy, so we can have multiple sets that we can use when editing. Let's see how this works. So if we go to the edit tab, for example, we can just customize each mesh alone, and you can always have the different presets available, so you can select from any of them. One of the most useful tools when building scenes and geometry in GameDraw is the polygon operation. So for example, you can take two objects. Let's scale this one and let's bring it to this game object. Scale it a little bit down. When clicking on the polygon operation, you can name your result. Let's say new object, and you can then apply an operation like, let's say, subtract between multiple game objects. So let's pick up our game objects. So from the hierarchy, we have two game objects to pick, this one and this one. So we will pick both, and then we click on execute. Once you execute, you'll have a new game object that incorporates the result of the both while preserving the material. So you can have new objects created by using this technique. And you can do subtract between two game objects or more, you can do intersection between two game objects or more, and you can do union between two game objects or more. To add more game objects, you just change the count and you can add more game objects. To make a serial of operations, polygon operations between each one and the other, just untoggle apply first all, and then you can select how you want to accumulatively create your new object.